slightly different perspective from where we were. So it was part of an experiment to be able to create experiences for angelics in sort of a denser form, so they could have individualized physical experiences. And the planet was seen and very successful for about a million or so of our years. And then it began to be visited by various other races in the system, and the races brought digression in the genetics. The pure Atlanteans had the spirituality in their the density they had achieved there, the purity, level of purity, equivalent to that of a 12-year-old girl, that kind of level of innocence at that time. But those that were coming from visitors that were coming from other places were bringing in different levels of density, and if they were mating with the Atlanteans, then there was digressive genetics occurring. This resulted in a division of the Atlanteans into two very specific races on the planet. And then this was compounded, one which continued to evolve, maybe not evolve, continued to stay in spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
Others that evolved more technologically. Then the twin for Earth at that time, or Tara, was what we now know to be Mars.
Sorry? Is that a yes?
Yeah. Okay.
To be known as what?
Mars.
Mars.
Mars was equivalent to the fifth dimensional planet, except that the land masses on Atlantis, as correlated to the sea, was a mirror image on Mars. So if there was 70% of land mass and 30% of sea, there was 30% of land mass, 77%. Those percentages are incorrect, but that's what I'm saying. They were mirror versions. Within the system of free will, the humanoid beings on Mars chose to evolve technologically and not spiritually, with a spiritual level of purity that would equate to a 60-year-old male. They, in their technology and their pursuit, avarice, power, they began to experiment with Merkaba fields, not just their own individual fields, but they were building Merkabas, actually larger Merkabas on the planet, like stargates, and they were harnessing energy from the core of the planet itself, and they were creating negative spin, and it finally resulted in them damaging their grid and their atmosphere, and there was an evacuation and an escape that was made via some of their Merkaba technology, but most were lost, and the planet was destroyed and fell into three-dimensional space, which is why we're aware of it in its current state. They were referred to in the system as the laggers, because everyone else in the system was actually evolving in some way, but they were kind of devolving. And it was thought by the spiritual hierarchy that the survivors who had actually transported themselves to Tara, the fifth dimensional planet, the sister planet, using their Merkaba technology. It was deemed by the spiritual hierarchy that this might be a good thing, that the survivors of the Martian project would be able to raise their vibration and become more spiritual, being alongside the Atlanteans. Instead, that did not happen. The laggers were like a rotten apple in a barrel of apples, and they continued with their experimentations, not just with the Merkaba. They accessed the planetary core, and in doing so released an energy, a primal ancient energy that was created, that was used to create the core, to create the correct spin on the planet to make it habitable. And this energy was now released to the surface of the planet. And then there were experiments which involved manipulating this energy and chemical DNA to create new life forms, but also in experimentation of weaponry which would, if used, be destructive throughout the solar system and the universe itself. And so it was foreseen along the timelines that there was a strong possibility now that the Atlantean planet would be destroyed, and that and various rescue plans were drawn to deal with that scenario, much the same as is occurring here. There was, through the inner realms that they could access, which allowed them the halls of Amente, stargates and wormhole technologies that could enable them to evacuate quickly to ships, or even back to other planetary systems. Those that could use those methods were the highest and purest ones still. There were plans to send ships for others, but it was understood that because of the way that a grid encapsulates a planet and the consciousness of that planet, and enables the experience and the growth and the evolution of the beings within that time-space matrix, that there would be consciousness that was cycling from being in the physical to being in the etheric before returning again in the physical, caught in the axiotonal grid system if the planetary grid was blown. And that would mean essentially that souls would literally vent out into space with nothing to stop them departiculating and dispersing and being lost. The planet would drop into three-dimensional space, and the catastrophe on the surface of the planet would change the masses, would be molten. There would be have to begin again, essentially. And they prepared for this by the contributions of very high energies that sacrificed their own evolutionary paths to contribute their essences to the construct of another planetary core that could stabilize in much quicker time and solidify the planet to create the right spin to accommodate life, to create enough oxygen, to create the right quality in water, although it was all going to be off. It wasn't going to be what they was going to be. It couldn't be optimal for the beings that were going to find themselves finally in this space. But it was as close as they could get. And so when the Marines would be my translation, light warriors was your translation. What was your translation?
Sons of a thousand sons.
Okay. when they were deployed to Atlantis, I have a memory as Grace of the deployments and it was like in my translation of the frequency where you descended to the planet's surface. My translation is you parachuted in, that kind of thing. But Grace, Grace was like receiving dispatches to say where people were, that everything had gone, the equipment was there, everything was set. And we were very jubilant because we knew we had this. We had this and we could turn it around. And then I have a memory of being in some vast deserty space where I could see butts and things in the distance, which were where the city was. I was in some vehicle. We were still offloading something. And as I watch in the distance, there's a detonation. And I knew it was that for me it felt like that wasn't the timing we had for this. Things must have gone, there must have been something very badly wrong for them to decide to detonate now. And so then it became full-scale evacuation, and I've got memory of accessing the halls of Mente, of running through the halls into a very wide space where a beam just took me up and out. Lisa has a memory of crashing through the dimensional space. Other people that we've had in our classes have got various memories of boarding ships, or at least putting their loved ones on ships and agreeing to stay. And I saw in the city itself, which was just normal open market style life going on, very like sort of Egyptian. There was somebody speaking like a soapbox speaker, and there was a crowd that had gathered around them. And I saw this, it wasn't white, it was off-white smoke that came through and passed through the crowd, and I'm not going to do that to your thymus, and would enter someone's thymus and retrieve them, enter someone's thymus and retrieve them, enter someone's thymus. This was Ariel and Ariel's legions rescuing as many of the souls that they could in that time. And it seems that these souls were downloaded into crystals to be stored and protected for whatever period it was going to take to enable the planet to be right for them. But there was the darker smoke. There was this entity that had been created by the Laggers, who saw an opportunity now, I guess, for control and possession. And this was a very black, oily, thick, choking smoke that killed many in that process. And the coughing that you each experienced is you evacuating the cell memory of the smoke of that period, okay? The planet was detonated because this thing was loose, this black entity, which we don't give a name because whenever we do, we give it power. And it was realized that with the Merkaba technology that the Laggers were perfecting, above the planet, not in the higher vibrational dimension that only the purest could reach, but on the surface of the planet, which anyone could reach, there was potential for this darker energy that was now being used to create a lower vibrational form of humanoid. That if that got to use the wormhole, the Merkaba technology that the Laggers were developing, it could leave the planet and it could pollute the system and the universe. So the decision was taken by Grace that Atlantis had to be detonated. And so those that could be evacuated off were those that could be rescued and stored in crystalline form, where they actually lived out kind of a loop, a semblance of life, but not evolving, not going anywhere, just a loop, so that it was a Groundhog Day-ish kind of existence. And then there were those that were already in cycling out of their physical incarnation on the planet into spiritual etheric that were now in the crystalline grid that actually were leaked out through the grid as it blew and seeped into space like, particles and steam and all this kind of thing. But the third dimensional Earth, as this fifth dimensional vibration lowered into the three-dimensional space, same
like
space, different
like
time.
a crash landing.
Yes. So the planet was kind of ready and not ready all at the same time. The survivors were etheric still in that higher space, now in the density of a planet which felt like moving through molasses, as you said yesterday for them. Being etheric, they couldn't push the penny on the floor. They couldn't begin even to construct, protective spaces for themselves. They couldn't do that. So there were volunteers who agreed to come to the planet at that time to help begin a new form of life and experience on the planet Earth.